With inflation set to hit 8%, Rishi Sunak has said Britons will inevitably need to tighten their belts. We're not getting 8% pay rises, meaning we're essentially poorer, and funding for public services also isn't keeping up with inflation. In short, we're in a new age of austerity. But Rishi Sunak clearly doesn't think everyone should be cutting back. The Chancellor has generously provided over £100,000 of his own money to support education in Britain, but it's all gone to one school, Winchester College. Winchester is one of Britain's oldest and most prestigious private schools. It was founded in 1382, and school fees are currently £43,000 per year, which is almost 1.5 times median incomes in Britain. Past students include Geoffrey Howe, who was Chancellor under Margaret Thatcher, Nick Carter, the current head of the British Army, James Forsyth, the current political editor of The Spectator, and his best mate, Chancellor Rishi Sunak. In total, 4 archbishops, 6 chancellors of the Exchequer, and 1 prime minister have been educated at the college. So how do we know Rishi Sunak is pumping cash into one of Britain's most exclusive schools? It's because his name has appeared in Winchester's alumni magazine. You can see at the top here, donors whose total donations to Winchester College are greater than £100,000, and then Rishi Sunak and his wife listed among the generous benefactors.
Winchester College, obviously they're hard up, Michael. They're struggling. They've got to deal with children from such obviously very challenging backgrounds who need all the support they get. Yeah, maybe not. I mean, I think it's obviously interesting in this country because only 7% of children obviously go to private schools. And I think it's worth pointing that out because you'll often get these stories in the Telegraph which squeal about how private schools are struggling, about how so-called middle-class families can no longer afford their private school fees, when obviously 93% of the British population do not go to private schools. About 90% go to comps, 3% go to grammar schools. And actually, in practical terms, they don't need Rishi Sunak's hand in his wallet and his family's wallet in order to sustain themselves, because they actually get in practice from the state charitable tax breaks, which you should class as actually as subsidies. They're tax exemptions, things like VAT, for example, the fact they're classed as charitable status, which gives them various tax exemptions. So the fact that the Chancellor of the Exchequer himself, I mean, he's a rich guy. I mean, if he's got a lot of money, he doesn't know what to do with it, which is, I think, a very good reason, actually, why he should obviously increase taxes on people like himself. And instead of frittering away his money on private schools, which are catering for the richest people in the country, his money, I was going to say it's hard-earned cash, it's not hard-earned cash, his money, his vast fortunes, could be taxed in order to go into the state comprehensive system, which, under Tory rule, per pupil funding has obviously been squeezed and suffered real terms cuts. Teachers, obviously, their morale in many schools is at breaking point. The sixth form sector in this country, I mean, my old sixth form, which is the biggest sixth form, was the biggest sixth form in the country up in Stockport. I discovered its budget was about a quarter of what it was when I was there. It's just absolutely astonishing. So there is obviously a real need for much of the education system to be properly funded. That's the comprehensive education system, not Rishi Sunak frittering away his money on taxpayer de facto subsidised private education, catering for people from the same elite background as him.
We've got some stats on that comparison between funding for state education and private education, because the gap between funding on state school and private school students, this is per student funding, has dramatically widened since the Tories came to power in 2010. At the end of 13 years of Labour government, an average of £11,000 was spent on private school students per year and £8,000 per year for state school pupils. By 2021, funding for private school students had gone up to almost £14,000, while funding for state school pupils fell to £7,000. So the funding gap between private and state school pupils has doubled. And this is the same information presented in a different way. So in 2010, spending on private school pupils was 40% more than spending on state school pupils was. By 2020, spending on private school pupils was a full double that, so 100% more than their state-educated peers. These are, of course, averages, so they actually understate quite how privileged Winchester students will be. At £43,000 per year, Winchester is around 3 times more expensive than your average private school, which means we can expect that for every £1 spent on state students, £6 is spent on students at Sunak's old school. This is who Sunak thinks he should be donating £100,000 to, or I should say at least £100,000. All we know is that the donation was larger than that. Let's just show you one positive in case you're feeling very depressed after hearing all of this. People have started to see Rishi Sunak for what he is. Ipsos Mori show that 44% of the public now have a negative attitude towards Sunak, with only 26% thinking of him favourably. And as you can see from the chart on the right, that's a dramatic turnaround from Rishi's recent numbers. Oh, and you sort of intimated to this earlier in the show, but do you think Rishi Sunak has been found out? Is there basically no chance he is now going to be our next prime minister?
He's cooked. Yeah, I think so, to be honest with you. As I've said, his whole reputation was inflated because people in the beginning of the COVID pandemic, when everyone was very scared and disorientated and there was a rally behind the flag effect, they suddenly started getting all this money appearing from the state in their bank accounts. And obviously that seemed to come from Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor himself. And they thought, woohoo, what a great guy. Very generous of him. Thank you very much. And even, I have to say, Rishi Sunak, some of the things he did, like Eat Out to Help Out, which was found responsible over the summer 2020, I think, for about 1 in 6 COVID clusters in the country, eat out and kill someone, as it turned out. But he also was very much allied to the anti-lockdown arguments in 2020. And before people might remember, I mean, it's been a long pandemic, but there's that whole debate when in September the 21st, 2020, Sage said there should be an emergency circuit breaker, and the government didn't do that, and eventually begrudgingly did it in November when infections had spiraled too high, and then we ended up with the Kent variant, which has been known as the Alpha variant. And Rishi Sunak brought in kind of anti-lockdown supposed experts into Number 10 to help persuade the Prime Minister not to go into lockdown. So actually he had a big role in the explosion of COVID then we saw in that terrible winter of 2020, and the consequences that meant for the economy. Because the argument we always made, we didn't enjoy lockdown, we didn't want lockdown to happen, but we saw it as a necessary evil, was that if you don't deal with the public health crisis, then you have a bigger economic crisis. Well, that didn't, unfortunately, filter through to the public, and he remained very popular. What has happened is his economic instincts, which are libertarian, right-wing, anti-state, do not accord with the spirits of the majority of people in Britain, including much of the Tory coalition. Bear in mind, in 2019, the Tories realised the sweet spot of the British electorate, certainly from a Tory perspective in the current era, was socially conservative and economically interventionist. A lot of the voters they got in supposed so-called red wall areas do not support slashing back on the state. They support a strong welfare state. And Rishi Sunak opposes all of that. So fundamentally, his ideology, and he is an ideologue, Boris Johnson isn't, his ideology and his instincts have simply collided with the instincts of most people in this country who don't support cutting back on universal credit, who don't support failing to take drastic measures now to help with people's plummeting living standards. He believes the market should decide. He believes market forces are king. The vast majority of people in this country do not believe that. So fundamentally, Rishi Sunak has been found out, which is his political views, perfectly legitimate, but simply are a niche in the British public, because right-wing libertarianism is very popular amongst certain commentators and certain think tanks, but it is not popular with the median voter in this country. Fundamentally, that's why his polling's collapsed.